Bore da, pawb. Good morning, everyone. I'm Clive Walmsley, and I'm from Natural Resources Wales, where I lead our work on climate change, which is very diverse, from reducing our own emissions as an organisation, but encouraging others to do so, but also understanding the huge array of impacts that climate change is having on the natural environment of Wales and how we tackle it. And I've been involved in the CHERISH project from more or less from its outset, and have been a member of the advisory board of panel of the project. And I think you'll have already seen a great diversity of illustration of the work that's happened within the project. And in this session, this second session, which is entitled Living with Change, which I think is a good strapline for the project as a whole in terms of what we need to take from the project. We've got four diverse speakers to come, and before we do that, I'd just like to say that we are going to have another Slido quiz, and I think over to Hugh. Are we going to kick that Slido quiz question out there? Hopefully that's happening as I speak. So just a couple of practical points which I think have been mentioned. One is if everybody can switch their phones off, but obviously, well, when I say phones off, put them onto silent. And you can submit questions through the Slido, as hopefully you all know, but we will also have got a roving mic, and you can stick your hand up once we get to questions at the end. So I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction, and I'm now going to hand over to Sarah Davies, who's from Aberystwyth University, for the first presentation.
Hi everyone. It's really nice to be here and to be able to present the culmination of 6 years of hard graft on the CHERISH project. And we've heard a little already about the storms that we've experienced during the course of the project, but what about the record of past storm activity? And we see that evidence in the landscape all around us, whether it's submerged forests, whether it's storm deposits on beaches, or whether it's sand dunes on cliff tops where we might not necessarily expect them to be. So we've got this geomorphological record of past storm activity and climate change. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, the team at Aberystwyth University, is to develop the longer-term context of climate change so that we can put the current challenges and future challenges that we're facing within a broader understanding of the nature and timing of climate variability over millennia. So we've been taking sediment cores from a range of different locations around the coast of Ireland and Wales, and we're trying to develop broader scale records of climate change over millennia, but also focused on the record of past extremes, so those episodes of increased storminess. We're using those records in a range of different locations and different kinds of records to help us understand about the longer term evolution of coastal landscapes that have occurred against a backdrop of climate change. And you've heard from Jeff already, who's mentioned the importance of chronology. We can't understand the record, we can't look at rates of change or timing of change without having a robust chronological framework. And we've used a range of different coring techniques in different kinds of environments, coastal lagoons, peat bogs, even on beaches, to retrieve our sedimentary archives. We've now got over 130 metres of core in our collection from around the coast of Ireland and Wales, and we've built up a big database of radiocarbon and luminescence dates, as well as some dates from lead-210, which covers the most recent past. Every core that we've collected has had initial core descriptions, photographed, it's been logged, and we also have a geochemical and magnetic record of change for every single core that we've taken. And then some of those cores have been followed up with more detailed paleoecological analysis, particularly pollen and diatoms. I would just like, while I'm on these slides here, Patrick Robson appears in all of these slides. He's been integral to our paleoenvironmental work on CHERISH. He's really driven the field work, the logistics, the laboratory analyses, and I'd just like to say a big thank you to Patrick for all the efforts he's done he's made in pulling the team together, but really his work has really underpinned the excellent data set that we now have. So, of course, we've lived with storms throughout history, and we see that record in documents, diaries, newspaper articles, paintings. And so we have a sort of rich historical narrative of storms. And one of the areas that we've been working in southwest Anglesey and Gwynedd, and you've heard from Jeff already about the work at Morford-Dintley and Dinas-Dintley to the south of this image here. The historical narrative here has been one of medieval storm activity. There are historical archives that indicate there's big storms in the 13th, 14th century. But what we wanted to understand with the paleoenvironmental record is, can we extend that record back further? Can we add some more detail to this? So I'm going to take you to Llyn Coron, first of all, which is up here, and it's a small lake which is impounded by an extensive dune system at Aberystwyth. I'm going to talk a little bit about Llyn Mylog a little further to the north. And at Llyn Coron, we retrieved a 2.5 metre sediment sequence, and straight away we could see there was evidence of some fairly extreme episodes of change in that core. We've got two 10 centimetre thick sand layers here, which indicate periods of more dune activity and sand mobilisation that's being deposited into that lake. Our initial assumption there was that this would be related to that medieval period, that sort of 14th century, 1330 storm. And this was the prevailing narrative. Previous luminescence work had identified that there was significant storm activity at that time. But actually, when we look at the sediment core record, we have a much longer history of episodes of extreme storm activity. The record extends back over 3,000 years, and we've got at least 5 periods of storm activity, some of which are visible in the stratigraphy. We can see clear sand layers. Others were actually much finer, but once we look at the geochemical record and relate it back to the core stratigraphy, we could see a clear record. So we have some major phases of storm activity, and the sand dune deposits that I showed in the previous slide are dated to 540 AD and to 160 BC, and that's using luminescence dating. This cores a really nice example of where we've been able to join together luminescence dating and radiocarbon dating and produce a nice sequence, which thankfully is all in order. A little bit further north, we also examined this coastal lake here, coastal lagoon here, Llyn Mylog, which today is a freshwater lake. And our assumption was that, given that we were working in fairly close proximity to Llyn Coron, that we would have similar kinds of records here. Actually, we got quite a different sequence, extending back 12,000 years. And within that, we have over 1 metre of marine sediment. The marine sediment is clearly identified with shell trace fossils here. And that marine incursion began around 7,500 years ago and is also linked to the age of submerged peats on the foreshore that were also dated to around 7,500 years ago. So we've got a nice sequence building up of landscape evolution in the area, but also that extreme activity. We don't have a record of storm activity from Llyn Mylog. And this is the sort of broader paleoenvironmental record. We've got marine diatoms in our marine incursion, and it's been a freshwater lake for at least the last 5,500 years. So the record of sea level change has become quite an interesting area for investigation for us. And just down on the southern side of the Llyn Peninsula at Aberystwyth, you've heard about the hoof prints that were discovered by our colleagues earlier in the project. These are dated to around 4,200 years ago. But there's actually 2 peat deposits. The upper one is where the hoof prints are found, and there is a lower one only visible at very low tides, dated to around 7,500 years ago. So we're picking up that consistent timing of sea level change around the coast of North Wales. Patrick also had the idea of coring through the beach to get a 3-metre sediment sequence, and between the 2 peats is another section of marine sediment which is full of marine diatoms. And so what we're building up is a picture of more complex sea level change combined with storm activity, and being able to look at multiple sites on a landscape scale has really been quite a powerful part of CHERISH. Moving over to Ireland, we've taken a similar approach down in County Kerry in Ballinskelligs, and Ballinskelligs Abbey is here. We've got a 6,500 year paleo-environmental record from the wetland behind the Abbey, but we have also been able to explore some sites to the northern part of the bay as well. And there we have an extensive peat bog, Emlamore, which is actually exposed on the beach at Reenrow Strand. You can see the peat stratigraphy here. So we've been able to take cores from the intertidal zone, from just behind the beach, and also from the main bog itself. We have evidence of submerged forest. These tree stumps are dated to just over 4,000 years ago. And there's evidence of submerged archaeology as well. So we're trying to build up this integrated picture of the paleo environment, the archaeology, extreme events, and sea level change. At Emlamore, we have a continuous sequence that takes us back over 6,000 years, and this is one small fragment of the bog which hasn't been disturbed. So there's an element of rescue paleo-environmental work here. I'm not sure how long that untouched part of the bog is going to remain uncut, so we have a good sequence from here. And we've used the bromine record. Bromine is a marine aerosol, so it can give us an indication of sea spray. And all of these peaks here indicate increases in marine aerosol activity when we correct for organic content. And the record that we have here of that sea spray content is really quite similar to another paleo-environmental record that we have from over in Wales at Corsfochno at Borth Bog. So we're able to start making linkages between our sites, not only within a landscape unit, but across the Irish Sea zone as well, which is really exciting. And at Emlamore, we've also we also got a pollen record, which has given us some insights into the development of the bog. We've got pine here, which is dated to around the same time you see the pine on the foreshore. We've got evidence of human activity with plantago present throughout, but increasing in the upper part of the core. And intriguingly, we also have the presence of some walnut, which is dated to the medieval period, and whether that relates to the activity at the Abbey is a question. It's only tiny amounts, but it's an intriguing question there about when those kinds of resources were first used here. So as always with these kind of projects, sometimes we get more questions than answers. But hopefully these two examples from Ireland and Wales have shown you the power of being able to investigate multiple sites within a landscape unit and multiple types of record to try to piece together different parts of the jigsaw puzzle. So overall, I think we've been able to identify new information on sea level change. We think we have a more complex record and evidence of a high stand around 7,500 years ago, but there is clearly more complex sea level history to be investigated in that intertidal zone. We're starting to build up a coherent regional picture of storminess and sand inundation over the last 3,000 to 4,000 years, extending our understanding back beyond that medieval period, which is quite well known around the coasts of Ireland and Wales. So altogether, we're building up a picture of landscape history and stories to tell about individual places. The paleo-environmental records are quite localised, as we've seen. These places are important to people, so these stories are important for communities in learning about the history of their past and the previous communities who lived in that location. And I think they also provide powerful stories to remind us that the landscape has always changed. These landscapes are relatively recent, and they have always been changing. Okay, we're facing really major challenges now, but we need to think about our future choices in the context of our understanding of that longer term dynamics that we see in the paleo-environmental record. So these stories, I think, are quite useful both for communities but also for policymakers and for those who are involved in managing these precious sites around the coast. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. And we're going to now move from the kind of paleo-environmental record to Sandra Henry from, who worked for the Discovery Programme as part of the CHERISH project and is now working for the National Monuments. And we're going to move on to the Promontory Fort.
Good afternoon all. So I'm just going to talk about the work that was undertaken on Ferriters Promontory Fort, and I'm going to focus in particular on the excavation. So Ferriters Promontory Fort in Castleside is located on Doon Point in County Kerry on the Dingle Peninsula. It's over 500 metres in length, and it is really commanding views over to the west to the Blasket Islands, and then to the south over Slea Head, to the north to Civil, and then also to the east towards Smerk Harbour. So the site was first recorded quite substantially by West Europe. He recorded the defences of the site at the start of the 20th century. Clare Cotter undertook a survey of the site as part of the Dingle Peninsula survey in the 1980s. And then CHERISH initiated work on the site in 2017 when the project was initiated. So here we can kind of begin to understand the erosion that's happened on the site over the last 120 years or so by having a comparison of the second edition map with our digital elevation model from 2021. Here in particular, we can see certain areas of erosion, such as at the western tip of the Promontory Fort. We can also see all along the south cliff face that the promontory suffered quite substantially from erosion. Also, along the defences, we see a number of areas of erosion, and then there's a number of spots of erosion also along the north face of the Promontory Fort. We also did a cloud comparison between our 2018 and our 2021 data sets in order to be able to understand the change that was happening throughout the course of the project. And here we were able to identify a number of areas of change. Again, along the defences, here one of the hut sites at the western tip of the Promontory Fort, and along the south cliff face we also identified erosion. So to kind of understand how substantial the change is, if we compare Clare Cotter's plan from the 1980s, we can see what appears to be the most substantial hut site on the Promontory Fort is enclosed here in this red polygon, and then we have the same hut site enclosed in this polygon in the digital elevation model of the site, and we can see where the hut site was once located in from the cliff edge. It's now only partially present. It's suffered hugely from collapse. We only have partial remnants of the eastern extent of the hut site. Also, we can see through a comparison of the first edition map and the second edition map the extent of change that has happened at the western extent of the Promontory Fort, and how part of the western extent of the Promontory Fort has now become isolated from the mainland. So just a number of examples of the type of erosion that's happening to the archaeology on the Promontory Fort. We can see here a masonry wall. It's only visible via the cliff edge surveys we undertook via drone and boat. Erosion here, it's not identifiable in the field. It's probably associated with the 15th to 16th century castle on the site. Here we can see what is potentially a hut site is eroding off the north cliff face. You can almost see the depression just here. This hut site hasn't been recorded by the previous surveys, and by looking at the OS maps, we can probably see that the erosion to this site has happened since the 19th century. So we undertook walkover survey of the site, and we identified over 40 sites of archaeological significance or potential along the headland. We also, with all the different survey methods we employed, we probably identified well over 50 sites. Here we can also see through the location of the sites on the south cliff face, the extent of erosion that's happening, also in particular here at the western tip of the Promontory Fort. We can see a concentration of sites along the north cliff face as well. So we undertook geophysical survey where we completed a magnetometer survey of the entire headland due to magnetic interference, so the data wasn't usable. But we had 4 target areas for resistivity survey, and they produced really interesting results. So for example, here we were able to map the extent of archaeological features eroding off the cliff edge that weren't necessarily visible on the surface. In all the areas, we identified features of archaeological potential. What's worth looking at here is this sub-rectangular enclosure with associated semicircular and circular features just inside the inner rampart wall of the inner defences. It is located centrally to what seems to be a 1 metre gap in the rampart wall and may be part of a more complex entranceway, but obviously we can't discern this, that could be associated with the Promontory Fort. We also identified a number of features associated with the castle, potentially a sub-rectangular structure here denotes a hall associated with the castle. But the excavation itself focused on a hut site at the western extremity of the Promontory Fort. This was identified as appeared to be the most substantial hut site on the headland, and alongside this it was located in from the cliff edge, so it just provided a safe place of work. So here we can see one of 3 plans of the site that were created during the 2 weeks of excavation of the site. And this is the final plan that was created, and it's the excavation depth was reached during the period of excavation. So here we can see the entranceway to the hut site. Here is our eastern quadrant. All the quadrants are named after the cardinal points in which they're orientated towards. In this quadrant, we only removed the topsoil and the subsoil in order to expose the hut site structure. In the south quadrant, we excavated to quite a substantial depth, one relative to the north quadrant. Here we identified that the walls of the hut site had been robbed out, and we were able to identify here the bank against which these walls were built up against. In the west quadrant, we can see a context which contains material that belongs to the structural collapse of the hut site. And in the north quadrant, we were able to expose some medieval layers of activity and a flagstone entranceway. So if we look at this image up here, this is the eastern quadrant where we focus on cleaning up the area around the entranceway. We can see the depth of the hut site walls, and we can see quite a defined entranceway. We also have this large slab located over the entranceway. So potentially it acted as an entrance slab, although probably a more likely interpretation is there's the lentil stone above the entranceway. This has been kind of substantiated through the location of it and also the dimensions of the entranceway and the slab. The earliest activity we identified on the headland is represented by this cup-marked stone. It's early Neolithic, late Bronze Age in date, and it was reused within the hut site. And then here we can see one of the section faces. This shows over 60 centimetres of material of collapse within the hut, from the hut site structure. So the basal deposit that we identified through coring was Iron Age in date. It was an early Iron Age date. The structural collapse that we dated, we got a date for the early part of the 1st century AD, and then we got a later Iron Age date as well. So this indicates to us that this subterranean dwelling was dug out at the start of the Iron Age, and potential by the 1st century AD, the type of structure that's present on the headland now is what was present on the headland, if not beforehand. And then with the later Iron Age collapse, we have indications of usage of the hut site throughout the Iron Age. So the hut site itself is, internally, it's rectangular. We can see robbing out completely off the structure here. The external area of the hut site is also rectangular with chamfered edges. And here we can see a drone image of the final stage of excavation. Here we encountered medieval phases of occupation. So the latest medieval phase of occupation is dated to the start of the 12th, end of the 11th century AD. And then we had an earlier phase of occupation that was the start of the 10th century, end of the 10th century, start of the 11th century. And so that date's quite interesting because it correlates with the dates that were obtained for Dunbeg, Promontory Fort, and the Clocken there. So this area in the west quadrant had a stratigraphy that correlated to the north quadrant and actually was an area which produced quite a large quantity of animal bone. Here we can see Patrick and Sarah undertaking coring at the hut site, and here we can see the charcoal that produced the early Iron Age date for the hut site. It's really interesting. This was about 14 centimetres below the excavated levels that we achieved in May, and it'll be further excavation will be interesting to understand how the later medieval activity impacted the earlier activity in the hut site. Sarah and Patrick also cored the inner ditch of the hut site, which returned a date from the 8th century AD, and this was really interesting as the core obtained hearth material, and so showed the later use of the inner ditch of the hut site for perhaps for shelter or something. But this also is a phenomenon that was found on the excavation of the Promontory Fort at Dalkey Island. And then our other area focused on for the excavation was the outer ditch. Here we established a lot of the activity associated with the later use of the outer ditch of the Promontory Fort associated with the castle. We see a later medieval cut. The deposit below this was dated to the mid-16th century. And what we see here is a cut and a number of deposits that predate the later medieval reuse of the outer ditch. This may be associated with the initial building of the outer ditch. So we identified a number of features in the outer ditch. For example, we've this stake hole here that was cut into the 16th century deposit that we dated from the ditch. We can see it's sealed by the later infilling of the ditch. And then we have a number of other features, such as here, which may be associated with the earlier activity in the outer ditch. We can also see that a lot of the infilled material appears to be from the castle and also from the inner ditch. So thanks very much for your time. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sandra. So, without further ado, we'll move on from the work on land on the Promontory Fort. We're going to move to the marine environment, and Alison James, who's from MSDS Marine. Thank you.
Thank you. So in 2021, MSDS Marine were commissioned by the CHERISH project to undertake a programme of diving on the Bronze Bell protected wreck site. And I was lucky enough to be the MSDS project manager. So that's why I'm here to talk to you today. But whilst previous project work by CHERISH had really included marine geophysics and looking at the seabed in that way, our project represented their work being taken underwater by diving archaeologists for what I think was the first time in the project. So the wreck itself is located very close to shore in North Wales. It's a lovely site. It's in about 10 metres of water. And it had first been discovered in 1978 by local divers. It's sometimes called the Talybont wreck due to its proximity to the village of Talybont, but it's perhaps more famously known as the Bronze Bell wreck due to the beautiful bronze bell that you can see in the image there that was recovered by divers on the site during the early days of their excavation. You might be able to just see the date on the bell of 1677. We think the wreck itself dates to 1709. There's an 18th century map which records a wreck at that location, and it's got a date written on it of 1709, and it says the wreck contained paper and marble as the cargo. And indeed, the cargo that we see on the seabed is indeed marble. There's a whole range of marble blocks from 80 centimetre cubes right through to sort of 3 metre long sort of rectangular chunks of marble. If you visited Barmouth, you may have seen this sculpture here. It's on the quay, and it's carved from marble that was recovered from the wreck, and it was carved to celebrate the millennium by a local sculptor. The wreck itself is designated under the Protection of Wrecks Act 1973 on account of its archaeological significance. Today's session is about ambition, about delivery and legacy. So let's start with the ambition or the aims. CHERISH tasked us with completing an updated survey of the site using both traditional underwater survey techniques and photogrammetry, as well as undertaking a baseline assessment of the site to enable the effects of climate change on the wreck to be better understood in future. It was also really important to the project, both for CHERISH and for us, that there was a programme of public engagement and outreach. Public engagement is critical, especially on these underwater sites, and we find that people are always fascinated by shipwrecks. And as archaeologists and divers, we're lucky enough to be able to go underwater and see them. But it's really important that we share what's beneath the waves and out of sight of many people with a wider audience. So that was built into the project from the start. Hopefully my video will play in a second. It might not do, but if it does, we were very lucky to have an excellent team for the project, and you can see some of them here. We had diving archaeologists, we had photogrammetry specialists, we had diving tracking operators, through to the video production team, and underwater camera woman we had with us on the project. If I had sound, you'd be able to hear some fantastic A-Team music, but I decided that was probably a bit much for today. The last contractor to visit the site was Wessex Archaeology back in 2004. And two of our dive teams, so Jenny Kent and Simon A.D. Davis, had been part of that team. And that really helped us to enable to look at changes to the site because they'd had eyes on the site and been there 20 years previously. Prior to fieldwork, the most recent multi-beam survey of the site, which had been undertaken by the CHERISH project in 2020, was georeferenced and loaded into the project's GIS. And that allowed us to create an updated site plan to be created in advance of fieldwork that our divers could then ground truth when they were on the seabed. The site plan here shows the multi-beam, and you've got the multi-beam underneath with the Wessex Archaeology 2004 site plan in red, with our updated site plan on top in sort of the slight bluey colour. Diving was all taken on scuba, and we were able to get three teams of 2 divers in a day, which gave us well over 6 hours time on the seabed, which might not sound a lot, but for a maritime archaeology project is pretty substantial. As you can see in these photos, we were blessed with beautiful sunny weather, and whilst sunny weather definitely made for a better project, it was challenging because you've got challenges of keeping your divers hydrated, especially when you've got them, like Jenny in this photo, sat in their kit, ready to get in the water. So it was just something extra for us to have to think about. We used a sonodyne tracking system to allow the topside diver to communicate with our divers on the seabed to direct them to where they needed to be. The 2004 Wessex Archaeology visit had achieved some really good photos at key points on the wreck, and we wanted to identify the locations and the directions in which they were taken. And if you look at the site plan here, you'll see a series of yellow arrows. You might just be able to make them out there. And they show the location and the direction the 2004 photos were taken in. And once on site, the team were tasked with visiting the locations and repeating the photographic survey. The topside supervisor was able to use the tracking to make sure they were in the right place and to guide them. And in this photo, you can see one of our divers, I think it's Tom, with laminated copies of those photos, identifying the position to physically take that photo. And this image shows you the diver tracking, so that each single line is a line that one of our divers took during the dive during the course of fieldwork, so we got quite good coverage of the wreck. So how did it go? Well, it was quickly apparent that visibility on site was nowhere near as good as 2004. Jenny and Simon, who were part of that 2004 team, were able to confirm this. Here are two of the many cannon on the site. On the left is the Wessex Archaeology photo from 2004, and on the right is the 2021 photo, so you can see the differences quite clearly. If we look at another photo, there's 3 further guns in these photos, you can see dramatically more marine growth. If you look really closely in the top right of the 2021 photo, you'll see a yellow round tag, and that was a survey tag installed by Wessex back in 2004. So it was nice to confirm that their survey tags were still in place. And finally, a single gun, and it's immediately clear that the amount of marine growth is so much different. Now, some of that's due to time of year. Wessex visited in May, we visited in September, and there's always going to be more marine growth later in the year. In addition, the 2 people who'd been there before were able to confirm that in 2004, to enable the features to be recorded, a lot of the marine growth was removed. But as a key objective of our work was undertaking a baseline record of that marine growth, we didn't remove any of it. But the photos will really be a key record of the site in future, and it's hoped that future contractors and dive groups who visit will be able to record the same features to monitor change over time. So we developed an accurate site plan. You can see it here. The multi-beam was used as the base map, and ground truthing by the divers allowed us to make sure that cannons were orientated in the right way and that things were in the right places. We identified a number of new archaeological features, including there's a concretion of at least 4 rings on the seabed between the 2 anchors that you can see. They're each approximately 23 centimetres in diameter, but we have no clue what they are, and it was quite an interesting thing for us to spot. You can see here, there's the ring features, there's just a photo of them. So divers undertook a photogrammetry survey of the wreck. You can see there's a lot of weed growth on the site, which is a real challenge. For those of you who do photogrammetry, you know the last thing you want is something moving. Well, this marine growth's moving backwards and forwards constantly. So it's very much a challenge, but you can clearly see the marble blocks on the seabed. There's a huge mound in the middle of the site, and you can see things like the anchors up here and the ring feature you might be able to spot. In line with the aims of the CHERISH project, we wanted to understand climate change and the effects, if any, it was having on the site. And to this end, the team undertook a baseline assessment in terms of the environment and marine species present. pH and temperature measurements were taken daily on the surface and on the seabed, and we undertook a marine species audit on the site. That was further enhanced following fieldwork back in the office, where one of our team who's got a marine biology background was able to actually go through the videos and double check what we'd seen. But the rapid assessment will provide a baseline for monitoring the site in future years. Over 32 different marine life species were spotted on the site. However, we think it's likely there'll have been many more. Recording the marine species present might seem sort of strange to me as an archaeologist in some ways, but marine species really are a good indicator for understanding climate change in future, as they're often really very vulnerable to even slight changes to their environment. We built in a large amount of public engagement into the project. Our team included a dedicated video production team who pulled together daily dive diaries. It's too short in time today for me to be able to show you any of those. We have got some on the stand outside, but have a look at them on the CHERISH website because I think they're a really nice outcome of the project. We also undertook visits to local primary schools and spoke to all the juniors, getting them excited about the underwater cultural heritage that is around them. And we hosted a video visit by Channel 4 News, which was part of a wider piece on the work of the CHERISH project. Finally, we took along our Heritage Hive outreach trailer. You can see it here. It was a really popular focal point to work. And as a sort of project manager for MSDS, the last thing I want is my divers sat around when they're not diving, if we've got bad weather or anything. But they were able to go into the Heritage Hive trailer and actually work in a different way by talking to sort of the community who came to find out what we were doing. So our 2021 visit is the end of our involvement with the site for now. It's certainly one we would love to be able to do more work on in future, and there's lots more to be done. It would be brilliant to go back and look at the mystery rings, but I'd also like to go back at the start of the year when there is less marine growth to have a look at the site. I've been absolutely delighted recently. Dutton Divers are a local dive shop based in Pwllheli, and they've got in contact with us to ask for our help and support in applying for a licence under the Protection of Wrecks Act for them to be able to go back and survey the site. And they're hoping that through our sort of support, they'll be able to go back and repeat those photos, and they're hoping they'll be able to go back 2 or 3 times a year, which I think is a really nice legacy for the project. Finally, I just want to say thank you very quickly to everyone who's helped us during the project, especially Claire Lancaster at CHERISH, who's been brilliant, and to Ian Cundy, who is an archaeologist who's been working on the site for many years and who has helped us with our work greatly. If you'd like to find out more about the wreck, then do go and visit the museum in Barmouth, but also go and watch our dive diaries, because I think they're quite good. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Well, to try and keep us on time, I'm going to move straight on to Edward Pollard, who's from the Discovery Programme, who's going to be talking to us about rope access and Promontory Forts.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We originally kind of were hoping to do like another excavation on the Promontory Forts here of the Copper Coast of County Waterford, but due to COVID, we kind of restricted we tried to make more of our remaining resources, and so we tried this technique that the Welsh our Welsh colleagues had already used distinctly over there. So you'll find that the Promontory Forts have come up quite a lot in our findings with CHERISH, and you see that's part of the areas that we've been working, the headlands and the islands, like very famously the Dunbeg Promontory Fort in the top left up there, and you'll find there's quite different varieties of these with stone walls. Some have got more than one ditch and embankments. Along the coast, along the coast protruding into the coast. So, and it was nice that it kind of linked Ireland and Wales together with these kind of features. But they do seem to be much more international as well, going all the way from Shetland down through around Ireland to Brittany and even onto northwest Spain. So one of the initial things, initial surveys, we're working with Toby. We recorded the Promontory Forts there along the Copper Coast, where we were flying along the coast. We were taking a lot of the pictures there, and we were certainly. We've seen the banks of the ditches, which were here. You can see the eroding banks, and there seems to be a lot of erosion. So we wanted to do much more work here on the Waterford coast. And it was interesting to see that sometimes you get the hut sites on the offshore inshore islands. So it does suggest that they were once connected together to a much larger feature when they were actually used. So what we're trying to interpret today, you have to kind of see what exactly were they like when they were actually being used. So to be trained as a rope rescue operator, we were trained at the Nace Fire Station, and doing the climbing and then coming back down, and then with that we kind of followed that up with training over in Dalkey Quarry and sites. And so when we actually moved to the site, we need proper anchors to secure us. So sometimes we would use the gorse bushes or the winds bushes, and but other times, if there's none of them are available, we're driving anchors here. Paul is driving anchors into the cliff edge, or if we're able to drive up close to the cliff, we can use the wheels of our vehicles to anchor us to top the cliff. One of the first sites that I will talk about is the Woodstown Promontory Fort near Anstown on the Copper Coast. See the Promontory Fort there. And certainly you can see the erosion that's happened during the project. You can see in July 2019 there on the left, and there was a collapse that was reported to us in February of 2021. And you see which much more exposed in the banks and the ditches there of the embankments of this double embankment Promontory Fort. So we secure the. But Paul, who trained us there, supervised us, and to secure the ropes. So let's go over in those areas. And you can see us doing the photogrammetry, where we take to put all the pictures together. And once we go over the cliff, and also do some sketching and note taking of the area that we can see of the exposure. some areas you can see bits of overhang. That's the PT top layer in the ditch. So we couldn't really go over that because that would fall down and collapse on us. So we move more to the side of that to record that area, and on the other side of the overhang. And so over the double bank and ditches there of that promontory fort, we went over like at least 5 times in that area. And it's interesting to see that there was a clay layer that we got close, like Westrop in the early 20th century. He recorded that as a splinter layer. When we actually looked at it, it was actually pure white clay, and that brought up because that similar kind of layer seemed to be found in the Welsh sites as well. It seems we originally thought it was maybe like there might have been a lake there, but it actually did seem to be part of the actual construction because it seemed to be appearing in banks. And so once you started looking for it, you find it in other promontory forts as well. So it did seem to link us with forts over in Wales, Larry Bain on the North Antrim coast, and a similar kind of construction that is going on in these forts itself. And doing different areas. I wanted to see, has the erosion gone to this area as well, where there does seem to be more banks. So how much erosion has occurred, and were those two originally linked about 80 meters away? So we also, over the cliff, you can actually even find some artifacts. You'll see in the future, if you're able to do an excavation, probably find more of these. You see on the right there's a very rounded stone. And similarly, again, more links to it with Wales. They've been finding the slingshot stones, which associated with some of these forts, and hill forts as well, which seem to be finding over here in Ireland as well. And we also found a struck bit of flint as well. That's the model there for photogrammetry, but from the UAV. I added that as well. So we were able to kind of, with our notes and sections, we were able to draw the double bank and ditch areas of the embankments to get our stratigraphy. You can see the inner and the outer bank. So this tied in with Patrick and Sarah's coring that they did link that in as well. So here we can see that I've marked the 2 clay layers. The outer bank, we got about 2 meters of core. The inner bank, we got 3 meters of core. The ditch, we got about 1 meter. And we got even charcoal there at the base of the ditch was dated to AD 38, just below the screen there. And you can see where I've marked the clay layers as well, showing over to where the banks would have been above. That's the start of the bank. And so the photogrammetry there is showing you where that is, the outer bank, the clay layer, the inner ditch, the bank. And so that's an area that we sampled. We were over with when we went over the cliff, and that has little bit of charcoal as well from the flotation, and that was dated to 285 BC. So we're certainly seeing a very Iron Age date for the origin of these of the bank and the ditches that made this a promontory fort. The other site we looked at on the Copper Coast is the Alona Brick Promontory Fort. That's the island of the O'Bricks, and was meant to be more of a kind of a capital area of a ruling family of this area. Unfortunately, the embankments have disappeared, have been eroded away completely. But there has been collapse, as you can see there in the picture, between when we started in 2019, showing this area is eroding. It's an area of silver and lead mining, certainly in the 18th, 19th century. And here's the we tried to get onto the island itself, where there's hut sites, but I think Paul said he wanted to set up ropes, but he needed more people. So that's hopefully something in the future we can have a look at those areas. But we looked in the area of the banks and the ditches. We couldn't quite see them, but certainly perhaps within the fort we did get 3 layers of stratigraphy that we were then worked off in the labs in Aberystwyth for the X-ray fluorescence. And here we can examine what the elements are inside this that's coming out of this promontory fort. So this is all the periodic table that defines the parts per million that we're getting within the context. The context 1, 2, and 3 were from that Ballynarrad, the embankment area of the Promontory Fort. And it was very interesting, the results of the amount of lead that we got from that area. 3 is the higher layer. That's the most recent layer. That's possibly associated with the 18th, 19th century, and even had just out the screen there's 1,095 of the sulfur as well. So perhaps that's to do with smelting and actually the lead mining. Didn't find any silver, which was a bit. Copper is quite low, but it's outside of more of the copper area. The copper mining area of the Promontory Fort. So it does look like this technique could be good, certainly for applying for more Promontory Forts in other areas of this mining area of the Copper Coast. It's interesting, if that's the more recent layer, these actually are ones below 558. So there is significant amounts of lead in those contexts at Ballynarrad, possibly suggesting, although we didn't get any dates for that area, it's possibly suggesting that the tradition of the exploitation of lead does extend much further back in time than the 18th, 19th century. Thank you. Yeah, so just to summarize here, we can see it's been quite effective for studying the stratigraphy and the artifacts, and we collected the samples for the dating. And so we're adding further information to what I've been talking about in the coring and the geophysics and the modelling. So certainly the differences in opinion, and I do like the similarities we're seeing in these forts and maritime traditions between Ireland and Wales. Thank you.
Thanks, Edward. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I don't know whether I've got some questions here, but do you want to ask the question, Hugh? I'll put the question.
So the first question comes in from Colin Dunlop. What size was the excavated hut at Ferriters Promontory Fort?
Yeah, what size was it?
Correct.
Yeah, so it was about 6 by 5 metres.
And then the next question comes in from Neil Jackman. As promontory forts occur in quite a few countries, do we know if they share similar chronology, or is there a big variance even within individual countries?
We have quite a large variance in Ireland alone, from the late Bronze Age dated right up to the early medieval period. Quite a number of international promontory forts tend to be Iron Age, especially if you look at some of the Welsh examples. But Ted, do you want to say anything else on?
The ones I've certainly seen, I think maybe Scotland over to Ireland do seem to be used into the early medieval period, and but it's like Dalkey as well. It's meant to be 6th century. A lot of the ones maybe for Dunbeg is 6th century, but used later into the 10th, 11th century. Yeah, so it was interesting to see that the one in Waterford directly ties us, with the Welsh. Yeah, but some like Tintagel there in Cornwall are later maybe tie in with the Dalkey one, into the early medieval period. And later ones certainly have the castles built on top, like Ferriters, and maybe Dunluce Castle built on these.
Okay, thanks for that. So if we pause there, when I stare into the midst, has anybody got their hand up? So, Claire, if you can, I think we've got a couple of questions. One around the back there. It's hard to see who's out there, isn't it?
Just a question stemming from the Promontory Fort excavation and then over into the rope access. Was the erosion data used to assist in the selection of the area to be excavated? You also mentioned some site safety aspects about going too close to the edge. So is there any link up between the ropes access part of CHERISH and developing an excavation methodology that's appropriate for those at-risk areas with workers' safety and concern?
Well, we would have done our health and safety assessments, risk assessments. Certainly, we saw the support was also supported, as the support that we had above the cliff would have supported us, and and they would have had ropes as well. So anybody getting close to the cliff was going to be supported when you get close.
Sorry, it probably wasn't clear enough. Just for future work, out of the work coming from the excavation work done on top of the Promontory Fort, plus the ropes access work that you've done, are you developing a methodology, a guidance document that would assist other excavators going on in the future on best practices to excavate at the edges where those material remains are most at risk? Is that something that CHERISH is working towards, or?
We have included in our best practice a section on the rope access.
Okay, if we can go to the, I think there's a question, and yeah, just there. Yeah, great.
Alison, lovely work on the site. Where does the marble come from? Oh, where was the boat going to and from?
It was Carrara marble, so it was coming from sort of Italy. We don't know where it was going to, and we don't know, is the honest answer. There's lots of theories that it might have been going to sort of help build St Paul's Cathedral and got blown off course. I'm not sure I believe that. It could have been going to Liverpool. It could have been coming up to Dublin, but the honest answer is that information isn't necessarily known at the moment.
Well, just there's a last wreck from Holyhead to Dublin, which had a cargo of classical art and sculpture being brought by James Caulfield, Lord Charlemont's brother, when he built the Merino here to house his vast classical collection. And it sank. His brother was drowned. But that boat is out there somewhere, so when you're down again, have a look. But it's a fabulous site, just tremendous, wonderful project. Thank you.
Okay, I'm actually going to ask a question myself to Sarah, because I think we've had questions specifically for Sarah. But at the end, you talked about how the work that you've done has kind of potentially got value in terms of future adaptation and how we manage in the future. So obviously that kind of historical record that you've got demonstrates that there's kind of, yes, there is kind of incremental change, but there's also kind of some kind of dramatic changes within the record. And how do you think we can use that to understand the future resilience or otherwise of those kind of coastal systems? Is it?
Yeah, I think there's different ways in which we can use this information. So for example, at Llyn Mylog, we have what is now a freshwater lake, and it's got a high conservation value. In the future, that is likely to become marine again, and it has been marine in the past. So I think there's some thoughts there about what we might be adapting to and what kinds of environments we might want to think are going to be important for the natural heritage in the future. I think in terms of communities, we found that talking about the longer term perspectives of climate change with through a heritage lens has been quite a helpful way of opening up some quite difficult conversations about what might be lost and how things might change, and perhaps is a route into talking about those difficult issues in a space that isn't necessarily directly impacting on those populations at the moment. So I think there's some thought to be given to how that narrative can help foster those conversations, which are often could be quite adversarial and could be very difficult for communities who are threatened with sea level change in the future. But I think also there's a story of resilience there from past communities who have lived in environments that have been changing rapidly, experienced extremes, and okay, they've had to move and they've had to change, but they have persisted in different ways, and that perhaps gives us a hopeful story of how we can adapt in the future.
Great, okay. I'm just going to do a final, any final questions from the audience? I can't see any hands. Oh, okay.
I just wanted to ask Sarah about the 540 date of sand inundation in Llyn Coron. Can it be linked to the late antique Little Ice Age?
That's an interesting one. I think that's the obvious connection that we would make. I think there's certainly a lot going on around that time. Thinking in terms of causal mechanisms, the term the late antique little ice age is a relatively new one that sort of emerged from some of the paleoenvironmental work. And I think one of the dangers of that sometimes is that we look to make those connections and find the common cause. And I think one of the things that we've realised with the work that we've done on different sites is that there are localised differences as well. So I think that's something that obviously we're going to look into, but I'm not going to nail my colours to the mast at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to go back to Hugh. Is there a final question there?
I think we'll just go to the results of the poll.
Yeah, if you, yeah, okay, let's go for the Slido answer then.
Yeah, so the question that was asked was, according to Climate Ireland, sea levels rose around the Irish coast are predicted to rise by how many metres by 2100? So the answer was 0.43 to 0.84 metres, and the winner is Kit Ackland. Congratulations.
Well done, Kate. And just want to finally thank, I don't want to hold you from your lunch. So first of all, I want to just thank all the 4 speakers for excellent presentations. And hope you have a good lunch. But I should remind you to be back here for 1:45. So we are starting again then. And also, just a further reminder that obviously, as well as having your lunch, there is the CHERISH exhibition and obviously the stands outside for you to view during the lunch hour. Okay, thanks everyone.